Hello guys, tonight, we're going somewhere quiet. Somewhere far from the noise of our time, back to the cobbled streets of Victorian England, where the lamplight glows soft through the mist, and the air smells faintly of coal, soap, and sorrow. Imagine a narrow alley in Manchester around the year 1870, a city that never truly sleeps, only shivers and hums through the long industrial night. Inside one small brick house, a woman sits beside a cradle. Her name is Sarah Whitmore, and her baby has been crying for hours, a thin, endless sound that pierces through the fabric of the weary evening. Her husband is gone again, working 16 hours at the mill, his back bent to the rhythm of the machines. The walls of their home seem to pulse with exhaustion, the ticking of the clock, the coughing of a neighbor, the faraway sound of a factory whistle, all merge into a lullaby of fatigue. Sarah rocks her child, humming softly under her breath, her voice cracking from sleeplessness. On the mantel, a small brown bottle catches the flicker of the candle. The label reads Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup. Every mother on the street has one. It promises peace, quiet, and rest. She unscrews the cork with trembling fingers, pours a spoonful, and touches it to the baby's lips. The crying slows, then stops altogether. A silence falls so complete it almost frightens her. But relief washes over her too, a wave of stillness that feels like mercy. She doesn't know, can't know, that what she's given her child is laced with morphine, strong enough to quiet not just pain, but life itself. Outside, the night stretches long and indifferent. Somewhere down the street, another mother does the same thing. Another child drifts into heavy sleep. The soft glow of lamplight flickers across hundreds of quiet rooms where love and poison have become the same thing. The city breathes out a tired sigh. History is being written, not in books or palaces, but in the small gestures of mothers doing what they must to survive one more night. And that's where our story begins, not with evil, but with exhaustion. Not with villains, but with love that has nowhere left to turn. Long before Sarah ever held that small brown bottle, the story began in another quiet room, not in Manchester, but in a German laboratory in the year 1805. A young pharmacist named Friedrich Serturner bent over his workbench, the light of a single candle trembling against rows of glass jars. He had just isolated something extraordinary from the milky sap of the opium poppy, a crystalline powder that made animals sleep so deeply they seemed to dream of another world. He named it morphine, after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. He didn't yet know that he had opened a door that would never close. When morphine reached Britain, it arrived with the polished smile of progress. The newspapers called it a miracle, a way to silence suffering, to tame the unruly human body. And in an age of relentless labor and fragile lives, miracles were in demand. The great cities of the Industrial Revolution were growing faster than anyone could imagine. Children worked in factories. Mothers raised families in rooms smaller than a modern kitchen. Illness and hunger lingered in the air like smog. And so, when medicine promised rest, just a few hours of quiet in a world that never stopped grinding, people believed. By the 1860s, morphine had become the invisible thread stitching through the lives of millions. But it didn't come in bottles marked danger. It came wrapped in comfort, in products with names like Godfrey's Cordial, Dalby's Carminative, and Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup. The advertisements were printed in soft fonts and smiling faces, a kind grandmother, a peaceful baby, the promise of gentle relief. No warnings, no hesitation. Only reassurance that love could be bottled and sold for a few pence. The pharmaceutical men in London knew exactly what they were doing. They mixed morphine with sugar and alcohol, turned it sweet enough for infants, and whispered to mothers that peace was just a spoonful away. And in that whisper, a nation of women began to fall, not into sin or ignorance, but into a slow, merciful dream. In parlors and tenements, the same ritual repeated, a mother, a bottle, a spoon. The soft sound of a child's breathing. A sigh of relief. Then stillness. So many tiny moments of quiet that, when strung together, became the hush of an entire generation. Far from the narrow streets of Manchester, the drawing rooms of London glowed with another kind of warmth, velvet drapes, polished silver, and the faint scent of opium in the air. The empire was at its height, and its people believed in modern miracles, the telegraph, the steam engine, and medicine that could erase pain. In these circles of privilege, morphine was not a vice, it was refinement, a whisper of relief between glasses of sherry and evenings spent in candlelight. Doctors and chemists, men in starched collars and steady voices, built empires upon these comforts. The Anglo-American Drug Company, the London Pharmaceutical Syndicate, and dozens of smaller firms filled their ledgers with profits drawn from the suffering of women too tired to question. Their advertisements hung in newspapers beside nursery rhymes and recipes, promising that Mrs. Winslow's syrup would soothe all pain, quiet all crying, and bring sleep to mother and child alike. The faces on those pages, soft, smiling women in lace, became icons of gentle domesticity. No one saw the ghostly hands behind them, mixing morphine into sweetness, measuring dreams by the ounce. In polite society, this was progress. Doctors praised these formulas in journals, calling them scientific blessings for the modern mother. Clergymen endorsed them from the pulpit, thankful for quiet infants during Sunday service. Even Queen Victoria herself was rumored to have taken laudanum for the pain of childbirth, and when queens do something, the world below follows. Yet, while the elite sipped and dosed in comfort, the working women of England bore the weight. For them, morphine was not luxury, it was survival. Sarah Whitmore's bottle on the mantel was the same recipe found in Mayfair parlors, only cheaper, harsher, and more deadly. The empire's wealth and its misery shared the same ingredient, flowing from the same factories. White powder ground fine enough to dissolve in milk, but powerful enough to quiet a generation. And so the story of empire and industry, of science and suffering, became the same story told in two tongues, one in the language of medicine, and the other in the sighs of mothers who only wanted their babies to sleep. In the heart of every city, in the soot and fog of England's new century, there were the mothers. Women who rose before the dawn bell, worked until their fingers ached, and came home to wailing children in cold stoves. For them, the syrup was not temptation, it was mercy. Picture Mary Thompson in Birmingham, her apron still dusted with iron filings from the factory. She has 3 children and no time to rest. Her husband coughs himself to sleep after 12 hours at the forge, while the baby cries into the night, teeth pushing through tender gums. On her kitchen shelf, a small bottle glows amber in the lamplight, Godfrey's cordial, for the comfort of infants and the peace of the home. She stirs the medicine into a spoon, whispers an apology, and lets a few drops fall between her baby's lips. The crying stops. A sigh escapes her. She leans against the wall, closes her eyes, and for the first time in days, the silence feels holy. But soon, silence becomes habit. The syrup is used again the next night, then the night after. The baby begins to sleep longer, breathe slower, need less milk. When he stirs, Mary reaches automatically for the bottle. It's what all the mothers do, in Manchester, in Liverpool, in London's narrow lanes. A quiet baby means a job kept, a meal earned, a moment's peace. What no one sees are the mornings after. The pale skin, the weak cries, the children who sleep too long. When one baby doesn't wake, the doctor shrugs and writes infant failure in his ledger. The newspapers never print it. The companies never mention it. The mothers never speak of it. Because in those narrow rooms, grief is a private thing, a candle snuffed out before anyone notices the smoke. Each death folds quietly into the rhythm of industrial life, just another sound swallowed by the hiss of the factory steam. No one means harm. Everyone is simply tired. And in that exhaustion, a whole generation drifts slowly into sleep, mothers and children bound together by love, desperation, and a poison sweet enough to taste like mercy. As the years passed, the glow of progress began to tarnish. The same syrup that promised peace had turned homes into hushed cathedrals of sorrow. In neighborhoods like Ancoats and Spitalfields, the midwives and undertakers knew the pattern too well: babies born healthy, sleeping longer each week, then gone before their first birthday. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of death that made headlines. It was a soft unraveling, one mother here, one child there, each lost beneath the weight of exhaustion and trust. Doctors started to notice too, though most said nothing. It was easier to believe the mothers had erred, that the poor were careless, that God's will was mysterious. But in the quiet wards of charity hospitals, nurses whispered to one another about the strange, glassy-eyed women who came seeking refills. They looked respectable enough, not drunks, not vagrants, just tired. Their hands trembled slightly as they unfolded small coins on the counter, always for the same brown bottle. And in those same rooms, where morphine soothed every ache and grief, something else began to grow: dependency. The mothers who once used it for their infants now used it for themselves. A spoonful aft. After long shifts, another when the baby cried, another to sleep. It dulled the hunger, softened the pain in their backs, and turned the noise of the city into a distant hum. But as comfort deepened, so did the craving. Soon, they could not go without it. Their eyes sank, their skin grew pale, and the days blurred together in a haze of fatigue and yearning. Husbands began to whisper about their wives: "She's not the same," they said. "She forgets things. She drifts." But few dared to judge. Everyone was worn down by the same gray life. The syrup, after all, was legal. Even respectable. The companies still printed their smiling mothers in the papers. Safe, the labels said. Effective. They did not show the tremor in Mary Thompson's hand as she poured her daily dose, or the empty cradle in Sarah Whitmore's room, where a child once slept beside the scent of syrup and candle smoke. The poison had taken root, not just in bodies, but in faith. The faith that progress meant kindness, that science meant safety, that those who sold comfort must be benevolent. The illusion held firm, even as the light dimmed across England's weary streets. While mothers drifted between exhaustion and quiet ruin, the men who sold them comfort dined under chandeliers. In the grand halls of London's medical societies, gentlemen in tailored coats raised glasses of port to celebrate the advancement of science. Their language was polite, their ledgers immaculate. No one mentioned the small graves filling churchyards in Manchester or Leeds. Numbers had replaced faces, statistics had replaced cries. And in those columns of ink and profit, a strange kind of morality grew, the belief that suffering could be measured, balanced, justified. Behind those closed doors, pharmaceutical magnates discussed expansion. There were colonies to reach, new markets to open, more mothers to save from sleeplessness. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup was exported to India, to Africa, to the West Indies, carrying with it the same whisper of mercy, the same lie. Each bottle bore the same promise: peace for mother and child. When a few doctors raised concerns, small-town physicians who had seen too many pale infants, too many trembling women, they were dismissed as sentimental, unscientific. The journals printed counterarguments written by company men disguised as scholars. They insisted the deaths came from poverty, not from morphine. From malnutrition, not medicine. The government, wrapped in its empire and its pride, looked away. After all, opium itself was the empire's golden child. British ships carried tons of it to China each year. Its profits built the very institutions meant to protect the people. To question morphine at home was to question the moral foundation of empire itself. And so, the cycle deepened. The poor became a testing ground for modern medicine, their suffering absorbed into the statistics of progress. No one intended cruelty. It was simply the cost of civilization, or so they said. In those same years, morphine became a fashionable addiction among the upper class as well. Aristocrats praised its serenity. Poets wrote of its dreams. The drug was everywhere, in the nursery, the drawing room, the battlefield hospital, and the Queen's own physician's bag. It bound the empire together in a shared illusion of control. While the poor mothers of Manchester prayed for bread, the men of power prayed for discovery. And both, in their own way, found only silence. For years, England slept beneath the hush of morphine's spell, mothers numbed, doctors proud, the factories forever humming. But truth, even when buried under comfort, has a way of breathing through the cracks. It began quietly, in the corners of small clinics and charity halls, where a few nurses started writing down what they saw. One of them was Clara Hensley, a midwife in the East End of London. She kept a small notebook hidden beneath her apron: names, ages, symptoms, doses. Bab. Babies that never woke. Mothers whose hands shook even as they prayed. They are not wicked, she wrote. Only tired, and trusting. Around the same time, a country doctor named Dr. Edwin Foster began to speak out. He had seen too many infants slipping away, too many women with hollow eyes and fading voices. In 1877, he published a letter in a medical journal, warning that morphine-laced syrups were a poison masked in sweetness. Few listened. Some mocked him, others called him dramatic. But the letter found its way into the hands of a journalist for The Lancet, and the silence began to tremble. Newspapers started printing cautious stories, not condemnations, but questions. Could it be true, they asked, that the tonic sold as a blessing was also a thief? That the peace mothers poured into spoons was costing them more than sleep? The companies responded swiftly, hiring writers to defend them, plastering new posters in the streets, tried and trusted since 1849. Yet, the whisper had begun, and whispers have a strange power in a weary nation. Women's societies began to take note as well. In drawing rooms and church basements, mothers who had lost children met in secret, clutching each other's hands, sharing stories that no one dared to say aloud in public. It was only to help him rest, one would murmur. He looked so peaceful, another would say, tears running silently into their tea. And in those hushed rooms, a slow kind of courage grew. They did not yet call it resistance, they were too humble for such a word. But they had begun to name the thing that haunted them. And once something has a name, it can no longer hide in the dark. Across the soot-gray streets and within the hearts of ordinary women, England's long sleep was beginning to stir. By the 1880s, the whispers had grown louder. The newspapers, once filled with cheerful advertisements, now carried questions that unsettled polite society. Why do so many infants perish in the night? What is hid? Den inside the mother's medicine? The answers came slowly, reluctantly, through inquests and hospital ledgers. Beneath the fine print of progress lay a ledger of ghosts. One winter morning in Manchester, Dr. Edwin Foster stood before a crowded courtroom. The mother on trial, a trembling woman named Emma Glover, was accused of poisoning her child with soothing syrup. Her dress was worn, her hands blistered from factory work. The prosecutor spoke of neglect, of ignorance. The crowd murmured judgment. But when Dr. Foster rose, he spoke quietly, with a sorrow that filled the room. She did not kill her child, he said. She trusted those who told her she could not fail. It was not her sin, it was ours. The silence that followed was heavier than any sentence. The judge dismissed the case, but the echo of those words carried far beyond the courtroom. Reporters printed them. Mothers repeated them. The illusion cracked. Soon, more stories emerged. Of infants buried in unmarked graves, of bottles sold beside bread and milk, of women who could no longer wake without the syrup's slow comfort. The public began to see the pattern: the suffering was not isolated, it was systemic. The companies responded with polished calm, their spokesman insisting on moderation, responsibility, proper usage. But the trust was broken. Doctors began withdrawing their endorsements. Clergymen who once blessed the syrup now warned against it in sermons. The sweet scent of morphine, once the perfume of progress, now carried the odor of guilt. And yet, even as awareness spread, thousands of mothers still reached for the bottle each night. The need was stronger than fear. The craving for rest, for silence, for a moment of stillness after endless labor, remained unshakable. Society was waking up, but slowly, like a body emerging from deep sleep, unsure if it wished to face the morning. For the first time, England looked at itself and saw the reflection of its own contradictions, a nation proud of its science, yet haunted by the misery its miracles had made. The change did not come all at once. It crept into England's conscience like morning light through a fogged window, hesitant, pale, but impossible to ignore. After years of denial, the government finally stirred. Committees were formed, reports drafted, witnesses called. Doctors like Edwin Foster testified before Parliament, their trembling hands clutching papers stained with ink and grief. They spoke of the mothers they had treated, of children whose lives had been measured in ounces of syrup. The Pharmacy Act of 1868 had already tried, weakly, to control poisons, but now new debates rose, sharper, more urgent. Morphine was to be listed among controlled substances, certain patent medicines were to be reformulated or withdrawn. But the companies moved faster than the law. They changed labels, altered recipes, hid their poisons under new names. Quiet mixture, infant's friend, the gentle restorative. The poison had many faces, and regulation could not catch them all. Yet, something deeper had changed, the moral silence was broken. The press began publishing exposés not just on the syrups, but on the system that allowed them to flourish. Illustrations of grieving mothers appeared in pamphlets and temperance journals. Women's advocacy groups, once concerned only with drink, turned their attention to the quiet epidemic that had stolen their children. And through their petitions, their small gatherings, their tear-stained testimonies, a new force entered history, the voice of compassion. In the cities, hospitals began offering new treatments for addiction, though few understood the science behind them. Midwives were retrained, nurses warned against the soothing syrups. Slowly, the bottles disappeared from shelves. Slowly, the air in the tenements changed. But for many, it was too late. Sarah Whitmore's home was empty now, her cradle stored in the corner beneath a worn blanket. She still kept the brown bottle, though it was nearly dry, not as medicine, but as memory. To her, it was both the thing that saved her once and the thing that took everything away. On the streets outside, the world moved on. The factories roared, the empire expanded, the doctors published new findings. But something quiet had shifted in the soul of England, a recognition that comfort could be cruel, and that progress, if left unchecked, might devour the very people it promised to protect. By the final years of the 19th century, the age of syrup and silence had begun to end. The factories that once bottled comfort now turned to new inventions, aspirin, chloroform, cocaine tonics for the upper class, new promises in different shapes. But the mothers of England had changed. Their eyes, once heavy with trust, had learned to read the small print. They knew now that mercy could be sold in a bottle, but that love could not. In the alleys and parlors, the old bottles lingered. Small brown ghosts on dusty shelves. Many families kept them for years, as though afraid to throw away what had once kept them alive. The labels faded, the corks cracked, and time dulled the scent of morphine into something almost sweet. It was as if the nation, ashamed yet unwilling to forget, kept these relics as quiet confessions. Meanwhile, the world moved restlessly toward a new century. The newspapers spoke of invention, of empire, of civilization stretching beyond the seas. But beneath the grandeur, the memory of the mothers remained, a story whispered in hospitals and classrooms, a caution sewn into the fabric of modern medicine. For the first time, there were committees on ethics, calls for proper labeling, debates on responsibility. The cost of progress had been counted, and its payment made in tears. And yet, in quiet corners, the pattern endured. New drugs replaced the old, new names hid the same hunger for relief. Human pain, it seemed, could never be fully cured, only transformed. Every age had its own bottle, its own soothing lie. Sarah Whitmore, now older, sat sometimes by her window, watching the children of her street run past with bright ribbons in their hair. She wondered if they would grow up safer, wiser, freer. The factory smoke still hung in the sky, but it seemed a little thinner now, as though the city itself was beginning to breathe again. When she closed her eyes, she still heard the soft sigh of her baby. The sound that once filled her nights and haunted her days. But now, instead of guilt, she felt a kind of quiet forgiveness. The past could not be changed, but it could be remembered with gentleness. As the new century dawned, England began to see its reflection differently, not as a flawless empire, but as a fragile body that had learned to wound itself in the name of progress. The Morphine mothers faded from the headlines, but their echoes lingered in every reform, every medical oath, every cautious label on a bottle. The tragedy had reshaped the soul of modern medicine, even if few remembered the names of the women who paid its price. In 1906, a new law, the Sale of Food and Drugs Act, required honesty on labels for the first time. It was a small thing, words printed in ink, but behind those words lay decades of silence and sorrow. Each regulation, each rule about dosage or purity, carried the ghost of the mothers who had once trusted too much. The world had woken, if only slightly, from its dream of easy cures. In the years that followed, doctors began to see patients not as statistics, but as lives. Hospitals grew cleaner, nurses were trained not just to heal but to listen. Women, too, found new voices, in reform movements, in public health campaigns, in politics. The mothers who had once been invisible became symbols of compassion, their suffering turned into the seed of something merciful. Still, the craving for quiet remained. The same cities that once sold morphine syrups now sold sedatives, tonics, powder. For the nerves. The human desire to escape pain, physical, emotional, or spiritual, never left us. It only changed its disguise. The lesson of the morphine mothers was not to banish comfort, but to remember what it costs when comfort becomes blind. And in that remembrance, England carried a strange kind of grace, the grace of a nation that had looked at its own reflection and dared not to turn away. The women who once rocked their children beside cold stoves had unknowingly lit a lamp for the future, a small, steady light reminding the world that mercy must always walk hand in hand with truth. Tonight, as we leave the quiet streets of Victorian England behind, the lamps burn low and the city fades into darkness. The factories still hum somewhere far away, but their sound is softer now, like the echo of a dream half remembered. The story of the morphine mothers does not end in anger or blame, it ends in silence, in understanding. They were not villains, and they were never fools. They were simply human, women living at the edge of exhaustion, searching for peace in a world that gave them none. Perhaps there's something of them in all of us. That longing for rest, for a moment when the noise of life might quiet itself enough for us to breathe. The bottles have changed, the names have changed, but the ache remains the same. We are all still chasing gentleness, still learning how to soothe the pain without losing ourselves to it. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them, the faint lullabies of mothers from another century, carried on the smoke and the rain. Their voices are soft, their stories fragile, but they remind us of something enduring, that love, even when it falters, still tries to heal. And that every age, no matter how modern, must guard the line between comfort and conscience. So, as the candle burns low and your room grows still, let the story settle inside you like evening light. The past is never gone, it only sleeps, waiting for us to remember. If your eyes feel heavy now, let them close. You've been listening to Historical Sleep, where history drifts into dreams and the voices of the past hum softly through the night. Rest now, and may the world of yesterday keep you company until morning.